Hello, thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I represent the Datasphere Initiative. We are a nonprofit think tank, and our mission is to responsibly unlock the value of data for all. So inclusion is at the center of the mission that we are set out to do. And we work in two streams. The first one on amplifying voices, particularly the Global South, in the space of data governance. And second, also building new tools for this new space as well, such as through sandboxes and self-organizing data communities. I'll talk more about that later. But I wanted to address the question on complexity, right? Understanding and the notion of the data sphere presupposes that we live in a new space, a new economic and political and social space where we have not only to deal with data and infrastructures and algorithms, but also with new norms that come not only from state actors, public norms, but also from non-state actors in terms of private norms, in terms of those norm setters that are out in the world, developing a lot of those terms of use that we all need to sign up to when we sign up to certain services. So you have this complexity between data sets and the collection of data and technologies, norms, and also stakeholders. And the way that this field has developed, I think it's very useful to grounded in the study of complex adaptive systems, that you can't actually fully model them because they behave, the behavior is more than the sums of its parts, and it creates a whole different dynamics in it. And when that happens, you can't model with traditional ways of thinking about how those different elements interact with each other. But what you do is that you observe and you adapt and you learn throughout it. And I think it's very fitting that this particular session is it's wrapping up the conference as the last session, because that complexity has been identified in all the different panels that have mentioned emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and the challenges that come from it. And so digital is really this cross-cutting field across the different sectors and policy domains that requires a new lenses, one that needs to be necessarily more holistic and more all-encompassing. But the problem is that it's often very siloed. Often it's engineers, as you mentioned, talking to themselves, or people who are around data protection talking among themselves, or around cybersecurity talking about themselves, telecom people talking among themselves as well. So having this session organized in the context of a broader conversation regarding development and inclusiveness, I think it's really key. And the potential of technology and digital transformation is huge. Just to mention a few stats, 2/3 of the population of the world is connected to the internet. Digital trade represents 1/4 of global trade flows in 2018. 2/3 of adults receive or are making mobile payments. 2/3 are connected to social media. And to mention the specific case of real-time payments in Brazil, for example, the PIX, which we'll talk later as well, there's already 93% of adults that have actually engaged in these tools. 93% of a population of a country with 162 million people, 152 are connected to this instantaneous payment system. And so the possibilities are immense for small businesses, for societies, for the governments to actually use technologies to improve and to include people in this revolution. But the imbalances also are very deep. First, in terms of connectivity, I mentioned the stats of 2/3 of the world connected. But when we look into the statistics more critically, we see that the connection is not equal. And today in this field, we actually speak about not only connectivity as a binary of either you're connected or you're not, but you speak about meaningful connectivity. So what does it mean for you to be meaningfully connected today? One, you need to have an appropriate device. If you don't have a smartphone, you're not going to engage in the digital economy the same way as someone who doesn't, right? Even the storage capacity in your phone often is impediment for you to continue engaging in certain activities online. Second, it's in terms of the size of the bandwidth. And so the quality of your connection is key. So not only in terms of how much bandwidth you have access, but also in terms of the constancy that you have, the fact that you actually have connectivity that is resilient, the frequency in which you can actually engage in this actually informs how you're meaningfully connected. And you will see differences in this meaningful connectivity, not only across countries, and that stats show very deep cleavages in terms of digital connectivities between low and middle income countries, let alone middle and advanced countries as well, but also in terms of differences within countries. So the gaps in terms of connectivity between rural and urban areas is very deep across all sorts of countries as well, in terms of what is the infrastructure that is there that allows people to engage effectively within the digital economy. And that's just to mention the first most basic divide within digital divides. The second dimension is around skills and capacity, which is required for you to actually engage in this space. And it's not only technical capacities that are needed, but a mix of them, right? In terms of foundational ones, literacy and digital literacy, very basic ones, but also technical skills and complementary skills in terms of soft skills related to entrepreneurship, being able to engage with different people. And then on the far end of those skills, you'd have really advanced skills as well in terms of how people are engaging and being able to effectively have AI-related skills. And it's interesting because the latest stats around the AI Observatory of the OECD show a huge gap in terms of not only brain drain between developed and developing countries, and that was mentioned in previous panels as well, but also in terms of gender gap and the cultural and sectorial barriers that exist in this space related to emerging technologies. The third dimension of digital device that I'd like to mention is the one on investment. It's clear with all the different indicators that we have that bulk of capital flows around technology goes to hubs in the US, Europe, and parts of Asia, such as China. And when we look into regions, for example, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, South Asia, they receive only a very small fraction of the money that is actually going for those regions. So the imbalances are very important there also in terms of investment. And then the other dimension that I wanted to talk to about is the one of data divides, which is key as an asset, as an asset for the data revolution that you mentioned. And data is foundational for creating and training artificial intelligence. So what you put in is what you put out. So if we don't have access to that really foundational element that is the lifeblood of artificial intelligence, of digital economy, we won't be able to actually reach that level of development in terms of digital economy. And so the different levels of digital divides are also very important to mention, because here unpacking also gives us a sense of the nuance and the challenge in addressing that problem. The first one is in terms of access to data. Access to data is very different depending in the country that you're in. A lot of countries have a lot of data collected from them. It doesn't mean they're actually using that data to enhance inclusive growth, to inform better policies. And so having access to data that is located within commercial actors, databases, and not being used to actually foster public policy objectives is crucial. The second one, as with connectivity, we need to talk also about the quality of that data that is accessed or not within countries. There's a sharp difference between the infrastructures of data and how the quality that they have within developed and developing countries as well. Between the difference of having up-to-date data sets that are very well structured, very well maintained, and very well financed as well, to the other extreme, in the reality of a lot of countries in the global south, where you have fragmented data sets, incomplete data sets, and outdated data sets that should be used to inform better public policies around health, education, infrastructures. And that's the reality, not only in low income countries, but a lot of middle income countries as well, where those data sets are extremely siloed and fragmented. Even the most basic information around an inventory of public buildings, for example, or just how do you actually ensure the interoperability and information that you require for national payment systems. And so this is a reality across many different countries. Maybe they have some data, the data that they have is not great quality. And the third level in terms of the data divide is in the lack of appropriate frameworks to govern data, be it at the local level, at the national level, but also at the international level. Still, we do not have good frameworks to govern cross-border data flows beyond what we already have regionally. Thinking about, for example, in Europe, the GDPR, in terms of how they are developing the AI Act, and how do you actually ensure that this is coherent and interoperable across different countries? Still lives a lot of countries in the developing country in a situation where they are disadvantaged in terms of negotiating their positions or asserting their rights to actually get their value out of the data revolution. I'm going to stop here. I've already spoken a lot. Thank you so much. What are sandboxes? And I'm going to draw on the word that my co-panelists mentioned, which is adaptability and the challenge that we have to adapt. Sandboxes, if you use a very simple analogy, we've all seen kids playing the playground. It's that space where we can get dirty, we can experiment with new shapes and new forms, make mistakes, and we are in a safe space. We're in a safe space not only to ourselves, because the sand is somehow cushioning our fall, but at the same time, we're in a safe space in terms of others. And that's what that a sandbox is about. In the definition that we have in our report of 2022, which is the first report that looks into the sandboxes space for digital and data specifically, we define sandboxes as a space where technology and solutions can be tested in a safe space or against different regulatory frameworks. And so in that way, we categorize sandboxes in two types. The first one, operational sandboxes, and many would call this a data space as well, where you actually set aside a certain space to secure data so you can test on new technological solutions. And that very much builds into how tech companies have tested their own technologies as well, where they set aside to do tests and with particular data sets and to not actually compromise their products, which are already in the market commercially for users, etc. But you have a separate type of a sandbox as well, which is regulatory sandboxes. And interestingly, this has been the first kind of regulatory sandbox is very recent. It's less than 10 years ago. The first one was actually conducted in the Financial Conduct Authority of the UK in 2016. And it was in a space, in a moment, very recent, where the main regulator in the financial sector realized there was a rapid space of innovation around payment systems, around P2P, around cryptocurrencies. And they realized that the regulatory framework, which is very rigid in most spaces, it's extremely regulated sector, the financial sector, could not be easily changed. And so they drew from the experience of how tech is developed to see, can we build a space where we can test it out and understand what are the implications for our regulatory system as well, but in a way for you actually to build on a dialogue stream with the private sector as well. We're speaking that it's a very important actor in the emerging field of technologies and different solutions around tech. And since then, a lot of different central banks and regulators and financial sector have developed their own fintech sandboxes. In Egypt, the Central Bank of Egypt actually has a sandbox since 2019. Many other countries in Africa have it. Many countries in Latin America, across Europe, particularly in the financial sector, have developed their own sandbox. And why this is important for the conversation that we're having today, because the key word, again, is adaptability. Since then, sandboxes have been developed in other spaces around telecom, around prototyping different technology generations such as 5G and creating those spaces for testing, but also around transportation, around aviation, utilities, data governance, around privacy-enhancing technologies, around artificial intelligence. And it's interesting because we see a growth of those spaces from different regulatory authorities, really building on the experiences in the financial sector to develop their own spaces of experimentation. We see this not only at the federal level in a lot of countries, but at the municipal level as well. In the G20 meeting that we organized in Brazil, on a side event of the G20, we actually did it with the Sandbox.Rio, who has their own municipal sandbox, where they're testing for different municipal applications of transportation within a sandbox as well. But also we see that this can also be developed across regions and across different jurisdictions. And this is particularly relevant for emerging technologies because now data protection officers around the world or AI officers around the world are saying, well, there are certain things that we're just not quite sure yet. So not only looking to the dimension of testing for new technologies against traditional frameworks, but also sandboxes have been used now to test new technologies against new frameworks as well. Because the truth is that in this space, there's a lot of things that we still don't know. There are a lot of ways on how to actually get from a very high level application of principles into the use cases that we're still not sure how it translates, because some of those principles, they don't necessarily match with each other. Just mentioning one example for a moment. Within the GDPR, which is the European Framework for Data Protection, there is one principle around data minimization. The EUA Act, which is the framework for artificial intelligence just recently adopted, actually calls for explainability of AI models and accountability of those models, right? Auditability of those models. And this is in contrast because for you to do that, you actually need a lot of data. You need to keep all the data so you understand how you trained your models. And then companies, entrepreneurs, startups are looking into those two things and saying, how do I conciliate those two things in terms of collecting the minimum amount of data possible and collecting a lot in terms of the life cycle of how these algorithms were created. And this is just to mention one tiny but important dilemma into how those two frameworks come in clash. And it's interesting because within the EUA Act, they actually incorporate for the first time at the European level, the notion that every single regulator in Europe until 2026 will have to have established their own regulatory frameworks. Interestingly, now they feel like they have invented regulatory sandboxes in the context of AI, but a lot of other countries are doing, including here in Egypt. And so what we have been doing is actually building on the documenting and doing inventories of those sandboxes, understanding and documenting their impact, their lessons, what worked and what didn't work, so that we can actually apply this for different spaces and different fields in the different levels, both municipal, federal, and international. And the bottom line for me here is, again, that notion of addressing this complexity, right? It's the notion that we need not only a new vocabulary, new institutions, but new tools to respond to the emerging digital revolution, that we need agility in the space, that we need to think about regulation the same way that we think about tech development. Whenever we download an application on our phone, it's inconceivable to think that you're not going to have to update it at some point. And those versionings, they come very close to each other, not in how the traditional way of doing regulation is typically done, which we are used to having to update our telecom law every 20, 30 years. And now the spaces are much shorter. So we need to think about addressing those issues and thinking about solutions less in a linear fashion, in terms of like, do a regulation and it's done, I'll just wait and forget, to having feedback loops of information where we test and we make mistakes, we identify the bugs and the mistakes in the software or the regulation, and then we try again. And I think this is interesting because this is an economics forum, I'm just going to say something which is key for us to really solve the puzzle that we are in the crossroads of digital transformation, which is the matter of trust that was also mentioned here before. Whenever we play whenever the prisoner's dilemma is played once, there is one outcome. And it's only when it's played several times that we actually are able to anticipate the other's behavior and have better compounded outcomes, right? And here it's the same principle. If we keep on thinking about short-term allocation and development of regulation and forgetting about it, there's only one loop in this experience, and the trust is not there. The dialogue with the private sector, be it small or big, it's just not there. The incentives are not aligned. But it's only when we play that game several times that we're actually able to build trust and anticipate behaviors and build on outcomes that are better for everyone, right? And I think ultimately what we need is to think about solutions, tools, and institutions that are prepared to align those incentives better so that we can make better decisions to improve people's lives and include them in this revolution.
Thank you very much. I have a question. Does this apply also to the private sector? And you mentioned the sandbox technique or whatever. Is it applied also to private company?
Yes. So there are different ways for you to do it. In terms of regulatory sandboxes, typically the regulator or the authority in charge calls for a cohort of companies to participate in their sandbox and test their technologies while being in dialogue with the regulatory authorities. So it's a learning process that it's very bi-directional, where they're learning from each other. The regulator learning from what's the point of that technological solution that business is trying to do. And at the same time, business understanding what's the point of that regulation that is there to begin with, what's the safeguard intended for. Thank you. My co-panelists made my job much easier in closing and answering the questions. So I'm gonna build on these, and I have 3 minutes, right? So I'm gonna have 3 recommendations or better wishes to close here my reflections on this panel. The first one is about we need to having a more nuanced conversation about data. Often we're stuck I feel, between two dichotomic views from open and closed data. And in a side of open, if you just have open data without any guardrails, you see the deviations of that or the opportunities of misuse with which you spoke to. So there are real risks of simply having open data and having no guardrails around it. But on the other side, as Nirvan was talking, if we have, we should close all data, we protect it, and we don't share it with the world, there is a missed opportunity there of actually using and creating value out of it. And there was a lot of the positions that from countries that actually bought into the narrative of data localization, where they felt trapped because it's a problem of how do you actually use the opportunities of global value chains around that data, on actually having the best services around how you're protecting that data as well. Value chains of data are extremely complex. They start in one country, they pass through several before they are done, if they're ever done, because they keep on moving and being reused, right? And so I love the concept of talking about data sovereignty because it's so complicated, but also it can hide the real policy objectives around it in terms of what is the objective behind data sovereignty? Is it around protecting cybersecurity? There are policy instruments for that. Is it about remedies regarding competition and monopolies? Let's think about remedies regarding that. Is it the issue around driving investment on local cloud solutions? Let's think about remedies for that. But I'm afraid that putting everything under the umbrella of data sovereignty hides the actually true policy objectives behind that. And I think it can be misused as well. I wrote a whole report about that called "We Need to Talk About Data," and I also think that the concept around data self-determination or digital self-determination is a more useful one than sovereignty, which typically relies on localization. The second point is the wish for more international cooperation in this space, one that is more mission-oriented. I think it's very positive coalitions around digital public infrastructure that has been really building on the Indian leadership in this space on the G20. Anirb and I, who work together in the T20, which is the think tank engagement group in the G20, we're calling for a coalition around data through a data 20, right? Around the global compact, digital compact that was now just approved in September, United Nations General Assembly. We also are pushing for an international decade on data. So I think those kind of mission-oriented coalitions are very useful for the global south to have more voice and to build on frameworks that are more interoperable across those different jurisdictions, because while we can advance some within our national jurisdictions, we do need more coordination across interoperability in this space. And finally, I wish for more agility so that we can be more adaptable as well as times and those different technologies emerges through different tools, through different innovation labs, through sandboxes experimentation, and that we're able to document and learn from those stories so that we can be better forecasting and being prepared for what's to come, because this is just the beginning, really. Thank you.